back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, hijackings were prevalent. I had one out of LAX. It was a red-eye night flight. I was flying co-pilot, and we'd go leave about 10 o'clock at night, land at Kennedy at like 5, 6 in the morning. This one night, about halfway across the country, a guy got on board. He had a cast on his arm, and he had a revolver in his cast. The metal detector that night was broken. Otherwise, they'd have probably caught him. He gets on board, takes the cast off, pulls the gun on the flight attendant, and wants to go to the cockpit. And I was kind of lucky. In those days, a lot of these guys were crazies that would blow themselves up, and Arabs and what have you. This guy was just an honest, all-American criminal. He thought he'd been screwed out of a $360,000 boat down in Florida, and that was what he was asking for as a ransom. But he also had a history of criminality. He stuck up banks and went in and out of jail. His background is his father went through Annapolis, was a naval officer. His mother was from Bostonian money, but she was an alcoholic, and he was a loose cannon. So the marriage split up. Found himself down in the Panama Canal as a naval officer and retired down there. He had custody of the boy. The boy's about 13, 14. The father dies, and the boy is just thrown out in the street. So now he's just a street kid in Panama at 14. Learns to steal, to stay alive. Grows up, joins the military. Did some crazy things in the military. I think they let him get out. He was very smart, but no parental control or anything, and he ends up getting out of the military. At one point, he even goes down to Cuba, and he's messing around with the Castro rebels.
Okay, no, let's go back a second. Do you remember the guy's name?
His name was Garrett Trapnell.
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 Do you know what a famous name that is in the Navy?
Absolutely, and that's his relative.
Well, there's probably not a lot of. Oh, now what year is it?
The year was 1972.
Okay.
And anyway, so he hijacks us, and we go to Kennedy. He's very well spoken, and he was well dressed.
When did he announce that he was going to hijack the airplane?
Shortly after, when he came in the cockpit, she knocked on the door, and we opened it, and he come. And
what kind of gun did he have?
He had I think it was a Ruger, and took command real quick. He had flown. He wasn't a pilot, but he had flown by himself. At one point prior to this, with 14 hours flying time, he steals an airplane from Orange County Airport and flew it to the Bahamas, where he gets in a bar fight with a guy named George Padilla. After the fight, they become friends. They knock off Emeralds of Columbia and take off out of the airport without permission and flew it to Florida, and got away and fenced the jewels, and he was on a spree of crime.
How did you know all this?
Because there's a professional writer called Elliot Asanoff, and he wrote a book on Garrett Trapnell. I can give you an entire hour on Garrett Trapnell. Anyway, Elliot Asanoff wrote a book on him. The book is called The Fox is Crazy Too. Because every time Gary would get caught, well, the first time he got caught, the family hired some high-priced lawyers, came in and said, Gary, it's 20 years for armed robbery, or why don't we go for a temporary insanity defense? They made it, and he got off on a temporary insanity defense. So he goes in a funny farm for a year, he's back out. At one point during the hijacking, he told me he stuck up 7 banks in Canada. They never caught him. And I thought he was just, giving me a line of bull. Turns out he did. And they never caught him. He was #1 on the Mounties Most Wanted list and on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted.
Wow, you were in the presence of royalty. Sort of.
Essentially. But your response to the last name, Trapnell?
Yeah.
I'm out at the Dalians out here at the Miramar Club one day, and this guy gave a talk on Fred Trapnell.
Right.
He wrote a book on his dad, Fred Trapnell.
Yeah. His daughter, the daughter too.
Yeah, she helped.
Yeah, right.
Well, I sit through the lecture, and at the end I'm thinking, how many Trapnells have I ever met in my life? Just one. It can't be a common name. So after it was over, I went up, turned out, guess what? It's Gary's relatives.
Oh, wow.
But his ancestry from both sides, he had a 2-star Army, an uncle that was a 2-star. And then he had Fred Trapnell, who was, I think, retired maybe 3. Patuxent River is now Trapnell Field.
Yeah, right.
And here I sit, and I know this guy. Anyway, Gary eventually, through this hijacking I was on, we landed Kennedy. We ran out of fuel because we're circling and we're negotiating for a ransom. He wants a ransom, and he wants to be taken out of the country to a country that would accept him. So we land after we run out of fuel. We exchange passengers for more fuel. You might, I don't know if you remember this day, but it was late January '72, and TWA had a press charter sitting on the other runway trying to take off to fly to China to be the advance team for Nixon's trip to China. And so the entire news system in New York, all the newspapers and TV, everybody was at the airport to see this news charter take off. Because Saturday morning, it's pretty boring, nothing going on. We closed the airport. So all of a sudden, we're the story. There is a young boy in the terminal who's running around with a little receiver, and he's plugged into the tower. So he hears us talking, the entire hijacking system. We've got we in a cockpit, we got the FAA, we got the FBI, we've got ground control, we've got TWA Vice President of Operations, we have some psychologists down in Dallas who wrote a book on skyjacking. We're plugged into the Dallas County Jail, which is where George Padilla, his buddy that stuck up all the banks, he's trying to get him out of jail. And we're plugged in to his lawyer down in Miami, all on the same frequency.
Good grief.
And it was total chaos. My wife we were living in Poway. My wife gets a call that morning, chief pilot from LAX, TWA. Your husband's been hijacked. He says, I don't know anything more than that. If you want to know anything, tune in KNS from LA, 1070.
Mm-hmm.
That little boy with that radio, one of the CBS newspaper guys, said, I'll give you $50 for it. The boy said, yeah, sure, here. Everything that was coming across this frequency that I just mentioned, they were broadcasting across CBS. My wife's in Poway, listen to me talk on the end of the runway at Kennedy. Since then they passed a law that they'll never do that again. But she could hear me talking on the radio at Kennedy during the whole hijacking.
What was the captain's name?
Ray Wagner. Ray Wagner was the captain of LA, and we took on fuel. We got airborne again, and while he's trying to get his lawyer, TWA is flying his lawyer up to New York, and the lawyer is supposed to negotiate this ransom. It's very convoluted, and so we're flying around, and he makes all these demands, and he's doing things Like, for instance, at one point he says, if you don't hurry up with this, we'll crash this 707 into the TWA terminal. From my position in the cockpit as the co-pilot, I could just turn my head a little bit, like I had eye contact. The captain from his position didn't. And the hijacker sitting behind the captain. The flight engineer, he wouldn't let him turn around either. He had to face the flight engineer. I'm the only one with eye contact. And he says, I'm going to crash the airplane into the... Well, I've been up all night, and actually after the first 30 minutes, I was joking with the guy and making funnies. So anyway, I look at him, and he goes, don't worry, you know, this is BS, don't worry about it. So I start laughing. The captain thinks I've lost it, right? His co-pilot's laughing at a threat like that, and the engineers are feeling the same way. But I'm the only one that has a bit of rapport with him, because I was no threat. I'm the furthest one away from the genocide.
Sure, right.
And so we flew around. Then he wanted to go to Dallas and get his buddy out of jail. And I showed him some numbers, since I had the logbook and or the flight plan and everything. And I convinced him we didn't have enough fuel. We did. But I said, we're going to have to make a fuel stop somewhere. Well, he'd already made one fuel stop for fuel at Kennedy. So he's a little comfortable there. So he elected to go back to Kennedy to get more fuel. And when we got on the ground, this whole time we're working on him for a crew exchange, because we've been up all night.
Sure, right.
I said, hey, you know what? I told him one time, I said, you know, sooner or later you're going to be sitting there, you'd be the only guy in the cockpit awake with the gun, and we're all going to be asleep. So let's get you a fresh crew. They'll take you wherever you want to go. He agreed to that. And I knew that this was critical. I just wanted to get the hell off the airplane. But he selected me to search everybody on the exchange crew coming up the ladder. And there was about 4 guys came up. I recognized 2 of them as our company pilots. The other 2 I didn't. And I was at the front door. He was standing in the cockpit with the gun. And he'd keep an eye on the other 2 guys in the cockpit. And I would take their coats and look in their flight kits. The 4th guy in had a flight engineer's flight kit and looked too young to be an international captain, but he was wearing 4 stripes. So I was a little, you know, I figured, boy, I get this guy in, now I got them all 4 on board, now I get the hell out of here, you know. And as he came towards me, I was taking, Gary, the hijacker, had him take their coats off. So as he came towards me, I was taking his coat like this, and I was just throwing it up on a counter that was over here. As I grabbed the coat, little did I know that behind me there was a transmission on the speaker system over the radio, and Trapnell turned his head just momentarily to see what was going on. He turned his head to the cockpit. As I grabbed the coat, the guy was an FBI agent with his hand on a .38 in a coat pocket, which was going to let go. But because Gary turned his head, I pulled the coat, he kept the gun, his arm came up and the gun went off about 12 inches off my right hip. And so the gun's going off, and all I know is that Gary behind me's got a loaded gun, and he's got a gun, he's shooting, and I'm the only thing in between the two. And I just dove out the door and ran downstairs. By this time, the hijacker never got a shot off, and this guy hit him about 3 times. And he fell to the floor. Hijacking was over. Went through 2 trials here in Brooklyn at the federal courthouse.
He survived.
He survived 2 trials. The first one ended up in a mistrial, if you can imagine. Shot with a gun in your hand. And some little white-haired old lady had to be Father Flanagan's sister, and she was on the jury, and she wouldn't vote to convict him. The judge got all upset, declared a mistrial. The second time, we put him away. He went to Leavenworth after a number of years in Leavenworth, and there's a bunch of stories in here. I mean, a lot of stories. He was sent to Merriam Prison in southern Illinois, which is the modern-day Alcatraz. When they closed Alcatraz, they sent everybody to Merriam. In Merriam, the Birdman of Alcatraz was called the Boogeyman. That was his nickname. The Boogeyman of that prison is always the worst guy in there. You know, the meanest, worst guy in there. When he died, Garrett Trapnell ended up being the Boogeyman. He did all kinds of things while he was still alive. Every movie you've ever seen where a helicopter goes in and they're going to extract somebody from a prison yard is all because one of his ex-girlfriends, or ex-wives, we never were sure, she hires a helicopter and a helicopter and a pilot in under the, she was going to go out and look for real estate. They get airborne, she pulls a gun on them, flies them to Merriam, and they land in the prison yard to get Gary out. In the ensuing landing, the pilot fights with her for the gun, and it's my understanding she lost control of the gun, and he had a pistol in the cockpit, and he got it and killed her. Terminated the whole thing. But I don't know what Gary did in prison, but he was, like I said, he was a very intelligent guy, and he had lots of plans for escaping and all that kind of stuff. But in Merriam, the prison is here, and there's a basement, and they had only three guys down in the basement. And the reason that they were down there was because they weren't allowed up with the regular prisoners because there was a price on their head. So Gary died down there in the lower level of Merriam Prison.
Why was there a price on his head?
Well, I'll put it this way. The other two guys one was, I think, it might have been a guy that shot the FBI agents in Washington, D.C., some spy thing. And the other guy was a spy that sold secrets to Gaddafi. Now, even though they're bad men and prisoners, they are still patriotic. So in other words, you know how child molesters usually don't do well in prison because most of the prisoners have children? It was this same thing. Now, I don't know what Gary did to get down there, but I would imagine he stepped on somebody's toes and there was a price on his head.
Did you ever see him again after the incident?
No. After the, I went to both trials.
No, you had to testify, sure.
Gary, I ran up to an FBI agent years later, and he said, "Oh, Gary's sending you Christmas cards." I said, "Well, I never got any." He said, "Well, they won't. They intercept them. It's part of the policy. They don't let, you know, these convicted people contact anybody that was at a trial." But no, I never ran into him again. He died in prison of emphysema. He was a cigarette smoker.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I assume you weren't much of a smoker yourself.
Never had one.
Yeah. Most of the old pilots I've talked to either didn't smoke or.
Yeah. No, I've never even tried one.
Yeah.
Both my parents were Camel smokers, and I couldn't stand the smell of it.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, we've been talking for what, about an hour and 40 minutes?
I was single my whole Air Force career. I got married a couple of months before I got out. So I was single the whole 6 years. When I left Pittsburgh, the base commander, not the wing commander, the base commander, was trying to court-martial me. Because anything that happened bad in the BOQ or around the club, he thought it was my fault. I mean, in his mind, I was the bad guy and the reason for a lot of this stuff happening, but it wasn't. You know, over half of it's not my fault. But anyway, he was trying. Somebody on his staff told me the day I left Pittsburgh. That was when I left Pittsburgh. I hitchhiked around the world on military airplanes going eastbound.
Oh wow, cool.
I sent you a copy of matter of fact, it's on the flash drive. You can read about it. They wrote a story on me in the Stars and Stripes. I hitchhiked all around the world on military airplanes. When I left Pittsburgh and I was on my way to Nellis for my next assignment, and I had a great trip. When I started out, I asked if I said, "Can this be done?" And nobody could tell me if I could do it. And I'd never heard anybody trying it, and so I did it, and it turned out to be just a fantastic experience.
Not a lot of time, a little shaky in those days, I bet, huh?
The most common carrier that I found was C-130s.
Well,
Tripped over a Australian C-130 crew in Chaney Airport in Singapore, and they took me down to Australia. And in 10 days, I hit every major city in Australia. Free room and board and transportation. I couldn't ask for more.